Hello, SGD Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part 8 in this series, and I've been previous parts looking at Hermes Trismegistus, the Corpus Hermeticum, and all the origins, who he really is, the various descriptions based on the older texts, and touching on alchemical symbols, because the quadrivium, but also alchemy is linked very strongly to this whole Hermetic tradition. The famous Hermetic philosophers were essentially, well, they're all into geometry, maths, astronomy, arithmetic, but also a very strong connection to alchemy, as it's called. Alchemy is essentially chemistry prior to the Royal Society. And these other links, like going back to the older Gnostic schools, Neoplatonists and Hermeticism, and how they all seem to orbit around this field. In general, there's a philosophy aspect, but natural philosophy was essentially the name for science back in the time, and these philosophies being scientifically based on natural observations, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, and music theory being this linking theme. So the Corpus Hermeticum, introduced in the 15th century, well, reintroduced or rediscovered, but they only really go back to the 2nd century. But Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, as seen in Siena Cathedral, and that being all those symbols such as the caduceus, the twin snakes, as in the caduceus of Hermes, being linked. Now I'll have a look, because I want to intro some concepts on alchemy. Stephan Michelspacher, 1615, and nature in Alchemia, and even the word alchemia, we'll have a look at that as well. Also, the connections to Kabbalah, which was essentially the same thing as alchemy. So there was varying philosophies throughout these, but there was one thing that links these, and that's the natural sciences. So this is a famous symbol by Michelspacher. Now you'll see 7 steps: calcination, sublimation, solution, putrefaction, distillation, coagulation, and tincture. These are chemical processes. We also have, we have these 7 Greek gods. So Mercury, or Hermes, at the top there with the caduceus, who represents the chemical element Mercury. The sun, Apollo. Artemis, the moon. You can even see the moon on the top. We also have Jupiter, or Zeus, as in the lightning bolt of Zeus. Saturn, or Kronos, with the scythe. And here we have Mars, or Ares, the god of war, clad in iron, iron being linked to warfare. And there we have Venus, and she represents copper. We also have these constellation symbols around here, and these symbols which are associated to these constellations, but that's not the symbol of Pisces, that's not the symbol of Aries, etc. What they are is a chemical recipe. Another work by Michelspacher. So we have the 12 signs of the zodiac displayed in there. One moment. Okay, so both these images by Michelspacher and these alchemic. So we have Ignis, fire; Aeris, air; Aqua, water; Terra, earth. So you have the 4 elements here. Also we have philosophy, astronomy, alchemy, and the virtues. Now these images, for instance, the wyvern, we'll come back to that, but for instance, Luna, the moon, Mercurius, Ionis, or by Jove, for instance. But okay, so we'll carry on now. It's focusing on those 3. They also incorporate the 12 signs of the zodiac. So you have 3 in each side, inside each sphere, and then, for instance, Taurus on the outside. So we have the 12 signs of the zodiac, the connections between astronomy and alchemy, and especially in symbolism as well. Okay, so now we're focusing on this image and on the outside, and again we see the 12 signs of the zodiac, but underneath we have these symbols, and they relate to So here we see, well, the sun and the moon. The sun is gold and the moon is silver. The sun, Apollo, and Artemis, the moon. But is what we have there is the phoenix. This is an important theme because the phoenix relates to what's called calcination. So we have 7 steps. These are the 7 processes like in the laboratory labor. Where, that's where the word labor originates as well. Now these are some older images of calcination, where you're reducing something to ashes. So for instance, in Vitruvius, he describes they would have clothes that had fine gold thread. When the clothes become worn out, you would burn them, and then you reduce it to ashes, and then you would add mercury to make an amalgam of gold and mercury. Then you can boil the mercury off and you've recaptured the gold. But calcination is a process basically reducing something to ashes to reduce it to its constituent parts and then being able to separate those pieces. So that's a more artistic image of calcination, where they're burning and then you can see all the pieces are released. And here's a more modern version where we're using a magnifying glass to burn something to ashes. That's calcination, as the phoenix rises from the ashes. So too is the process of calcination. Again, we focus, so we have, again, the phoenix, and this was a common image for all these alchemists, the phoenix, the blackbird, but we also have Pavo, the peacock, in the middle there. Now, in the southern hemisphere of the constellations, we have the Phoenix constellation. And remember, Alchemy. We also have the constellation Pavo, the peacock. And before we leave, the Phoenix constellation, Pavo, the peacock, and we also have this constellation here called Fornax. Now it's upside down, but Fornax is the furnace. There's a picture there, and apparatus chemicus. We even have distillation and alembic happening there as well, and again the flames reducing things to ashes. This is so many of these constellations have these very important hermetic tools of the sciences. So calcination with the phoenix, we have it both in the Kabbalist image and also this one by Michelspacher. Now you'll also see it in Splendor Solis. I just did a montage of that. We notice we have essentially Hera and the peacock. We also have these 3 birds in here, but this was the language where they wrote their chemical notation in at the time. Also worth noting is the Triple Crown, which relates to the Eleusinian mysteries, and also the popes still wear a triple crown, as it's called. Here are a couple of symbols. So these are the various symbols used in alchemy symbols, and a lot of them still relate to chemistry and to the planets as well. For instance, cinnabar, sulfur, and tartar. We'll get, okay. Now, this symbol here is salt. Okay, and you'll see this very, very often, this triangle, where we have mercury, sulfur, and salt. Very important in alchemy, but also in just chemistry in general. Basically relates back to Basil Valentine, and they divided the minerals, the elements, the essential chemicals into 3 groups: salt, sulfur, and mercury. Salt, now I'm excluding using a nuclear reactor, that type of stuff, but salt, you cannot melt salt. When sulfur burns, it's gone. But you can melt or turn mercury into a gas and vapor, then you can recapture it. So like salt is very strong. Sulfur just, it's just sort of, it's gone, it's more flighty. as where mercury is a little bit in between. So it, like liquid mercury, that's a metal which at room temperature essentially turns into a liquid, where it's melting. So iron, if you have a bar of iron, that's actually frozen. When you heat it and melt it, it becomes a liquid, and if you heat it to a high enough, it turns into a vapor or a gas. So just like ice is a solid, it's frozen water, liquid water, and then steam or vapor. And this applies to all these chemicals, but we see these chemical symbols, alchemical symbols. And they also relate now, for instance, where we see this constellation. That's not the symbol for that constellation, as that's not the symbol for Pisces. So that's Aries, but that's not the symbol for Aries, that's the symbol for tartar. And what tartar is a salt, potassium, you can even bitartrate, so still tartar. And this comes from, one of the ways to extract it was to get it from containers of wine, and then to purify it is the cream of tartar. And connected to there we also see the symbol for sulfur. What's that constellation again? Escapes from my mind at the moment. Now sulfur, the element as well, along with mercury and salt, made up three of the Paracelsian principles. Paracelsian principles. Paracelsus are very important, especially in regards to medicine and pharmacy, chemistry, and toxology, but also the salt, sulfur, and mercury being related to the Azoth of the Philosopher's Stone, Basil Valentine, and these earlier people. So we have the seven gods: Venus, Mars, Apollo, the sun; Mercury, Artemis, the moon goddess; Jupiter and Saturn. The symbols for these planets are also the symbols for copper, iron, gold, mercury, silver, tin, and lead. 7 steps of alchemy, the 7 essential metals used in alchemy, and alchemy, alchemia, which is an older term. And I'll leave that for the next episode because I want to introduce the concept of, also link this page, the chemistry of Isaac Newton, which has a dictionary of these words and these terms, but you can also change the symbols for text and go into the symbols and look at what all these symbols mean as well. Very important resource. I'll put that link in the description. But the point of this, and especially Paracelsus, is to relate to apothecary or alchemy as medicine makers. But while we're staying on Isaac Newton, because those constellation themes, so this is by Athanasius Kircher, and this is just a constant set of symbols that you'll see, the 7 there, the 7 planets, Sun, Earth, Moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, and how they relate to Mars being male, the god of war, Mars; Venus being female or copper; and Mercury or Hermes being the element of Mercury, as in the planet Mercury. This is an image, one of the alchemical works, where Isaac Newton was speaking of chemicals, but he was also separating them into groups, masculine and feminine, applying masculine and feminine, just like copper being feminine, it's soft, it's beautiful, it's in that sense, as where iron is hard and it rusts. So copper is female, and Mars, god of war, is iron, male. Okay, how are we going for time? And also Isaac Newton believed that in the Bible, in ancient Greek myths, that these legends, as they relate, gods relate to these metals, they also relate to alchemical recipes, and there's reconstructions of his ideas have actually, shown true. So you can pause and read that for the moment. But the net, which is said to be the first piece of constructing the Philosopher's Stone, and now the alchemy of metals, and the next part I'll be focusing on the alchemy of medicines. Cheers. Have